The sudden escalation between Israel, the United States, and Iran in early March 2026 marks one of the most consequential geopolitical ruptures in the Middle East since the Iraq War. With implications that extend far beyond the immediate battlefield, what began as a coordinated series of US-Israeli strikes or Iranian targets has rapidly transformed into a multi-theater confrontation involving missile exchanges, strikes on symbolic infrastructure such as Iran's state broadcaster, retaliatory strikes across Gulf airspace, and threats to close the Strait of Hormuz. The conflict is not merely a bilateral clash between adversaries, it is a structural shock to the global energy systems, regional security architecture, and the fragile balance of deterrence that has defined Middle Eastern geopolitics for decades. The targeting of Tehran and Beirut underscores the layered nature of this war. Israel's strikes on Iranian state television, reportedly aimed at communications infrastructure, represent a psychological and symbolic escalation. Modern war is fought not only in airspace and on land, but in perception, narrative dominance, and domestic morale. Attacking a state broadcaster signals an attempt to degrade internal cohesion and disrupt state messaging. Simultaneously, Israeli strikes in Beirut against Hezbollah-linked facilities illustrate the integrated nature of Iran's regional network of allied armed groups. Tehran's deterrence doctrine has long relied on a ring of influence stretching through Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. By striking in Lebanon while engaging Iran directly, Israel is attempting to degrade that network preemptively and prevent a coordinated multi-front retaliation. The reported death of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, if definitively confirmed, would constitute a regime-level shock event. Iran's political system is structured around the central authority of the supreme leader, who acts both as the ultimate religious authority and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. A sudden removal at a moment of external attack risks elite fragmentation, succession uncertainty, and intensified internal power struggles. However, history suggests that external aggression often produces temporary consolidation rather than collapse. The Iranian political elite, including the Revolutionary Guard, Judiciary, Guardian Council, and Presidency, have institutional incentives to close rank in times of crisis. The durability of Iran's system has repeatedly surprised external observers, and predictions of rapid regime collapse have historically proven premature. The threat to close the Strait of Hormuz introduces the most globally significant dimension of the crisis. Approximately one-fifth of the world's oil supply and a substantial portion of liquefied natural gas transit this narrow maritime corridor between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Even the perception of closure is enough to disrupt shipping flows and spike insurance premiums and drive speculative surges in energy markets. Oil prices moving from roughly $70 to near 80 per barrel within days signals anticipatory pricing of risk rather than actual supply elimination. Historically, Iran has threatened closure numerous times but has rarely achieved sustained interdiction due to overwhelming US naval presence in the Persian Gulf. Nevertheless, asymmetric tactics such as mining, drone harassment, missile threats, or limited tanker strikes could create episodic disruptions that generate sustained volatility without requiring maritime blockade. Energy markets are acutely sensitive to choke points because modern economics remain structurally dependent on hydrocarbon flows despite decades of diversification rhetoric. If shipping lines remain unstable, central banks already navigating inflationary pressure would face renewed cost push dynamics. Airlines, manufacturing sectors, global logistic networks would experience rising input costs. Emerging markets that import energy could see currency depreciation and balance of payment stress. Europe, already sensitive to supply shocks in the aftermath of the Russo-Ukraine war, would confront renewed vulnerability. In Asia, heavily energy-dependent economies such as Japan, South Korea, and India would likely accelerate strategic petroleum reserve releases while seeking alternative supply arrangements. The US posture in this conflict appears calibrated yet ambiguous. Statements suggesting the war could last 4 to 5 weeks indicate pre-planned operational phases rather than spontaneous retaliation. At the same time, the United States has publicly stated it is not currently posturing for ground invasion. This aligns with contemporary American doctrine favoring air superiority, standoff precision strikes, and naval dominance rather than large-scale land occupation. The objective, as articulated by US officials, is the degradation of ballistic missile capabilities and naval assets. However, limiting objectives can expand rapidly under conditions of retaliatory escalation, especially if American casualties increase or regional allies are heavily targeted. Iran's retaliatory capacity lies primarily in the asymmetric warfare sector. While its conventional air force is comparatively limited relative to Israel and the United States, its missile arsenal drone capabilities are extensive. Ballistic missile barrages against Gulf states attempting jet incursions and the mobilization of allied groups such as Hezbollah demonstrate Iran's capacity to widen the battlefield horizontally. Tehran's strategy historically emphasizes imposing distributed costs rather than achieving conventional battlefield dominance. By striking oil infrastructure, US bases, or shipping, Iran seeks to internationalize the pain of the conflict and create pressure for de-escalation. The concept of a scorched earth escalation tactic, referenced by analysts, reflects this logic beautifully. If Iran cannot win militarily, it can raise the systematic price of continued war. The Gulf states are positioned in an uneasy middle ground. Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia hosts US military assets while simultaneously maintaining complex economic relationships with Iran. Missile interceptions over Doha and drone strikes near US facilities highlight the vulnerability of these states. Their strategic calculus is to prevent becoming primary battlegrounds while preserving alliance credibility. Any sustained targeting of Gulf civilian infrastructure would intensify pressure for collective defense responses and potentially draw more states directly into hostilities. International reaction is constrained by fragmentation in global governance. The United States Security Council, already divided on major geopolitical issues, is unlikely to produce a unified enforcement mechanism. Russia and China, both maintaining strategic relationships with Iran, may offer diplomatic backing or material support, short of direct military intervention. European states will likely push for a ceasefire negotiation, with simultaneously reinforcing defensive measures for shipping and regional assets. The war thus unfolds within a multipolar environment where consensus-based intervention is improbable. Information warfare adds another layer of volatility. Conflicting casualty figures, unverified reports of leadership decapitation, and rapid narrative shifts illustrates the fog of war. Each actor has incentive to frame events strategically. Claims of school bombings, civilian casualties, or targeted infrastructure destruction become tools of moral positioning. In the digital era, perception can influence diplomatic alignments and public support as much as battlefield outcomes. Long-term implications hinge on duration and scale. A contained air campaign lasting several weeks, followed by negotiated de-escalation, would resemble prior Middle Eastern flare-ups, albeit at a higher intensity. However, sustained attacks on maritime infrastructure, prolonged oil disruptions, or regime destabilization in Tehran could reshape regional order. If Iran's leadership transitions amid war, internal power struggles could either harden ideological rigidity or create openings for reformist recalibration. Conversely, heavy external pressure could entrench hardline factions. The strategic stakes are therefore layered, and regional deterrence credibility for Israel. However, energy stability for the world economy, regime survival for Iran, alliance reliability for the United States, and systematic stability for Gulf states. Each actor operates under distinct incentive structures, but within a tightly interdependent system. The more the conflict spreads, geographically or temporarily, the more it shifts from a regional military campaign to a global economic and political crisis. In sum, the March 2026 escalation is not simply another episode in the long-standing Israel-Iran shadow war. It represents a convergence of direct interstate confrontation, energy chokepoint vulnerability, alliance testing, and leadership uncertainty. The conflict sits at the intersection of military strategy, economic independence, and ideological rivalry. Its trajectory will depend on whether deterrence mechanisms reassert themselves before systematic thresholds are crossed. Should the Strait of Hormuz remain unstable and cross-border strikes intensify, the ripple effects will extend far beyond the Middle East, shaping global markets, diplomatic alignments, and strategic calculus of major powers for years to come.